And welcome back. Welcome back. I am joined this evening by a man that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is Mr. Gary DeMar from American Vision. Gary, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. I am.
That side of the screen treating you well?
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So we're just a couple guys with glasses here, and we wanted to recap the 2025 Berean Conference. Gary, I want to thank you before we even get rolling just for doing this with me. I know that Zach and David did a review video, and then I saw Mike did one with Denise, and I think other Mike. I think it was a different Mike. So appreciate you jumping on with me just to share your thoughts. So I guess just to open it up, Gary, was this your second year at Berean? Is that right?
Yeah. Speaking at this conference, I had been there once before with a kind of a round table discussion about a completely different topic. But yeah, this is my second Berean conference.
Okay. It was my second as well. I was in 24 and 25. And I think you were 23 and 25.
Right. Yes.
So
Yeah.
so I guess let's just get into it, Gary. What did you think about the conference overall? I mean, just 10,000 foot, what did you think? How'd it go?
Oh, I think it was great. I mean, the people there were, I mean, from literally all over the country,
Hmm.
and I think Canada and England as well.
Yep.
And that's always encouraging. And I think the enthusiasm of everybody is great. You go down there for breakfast in the morning. I mean, 6 o'clock, you go down there and there are people already there, and by
Hmm.
7:30 or so, all the tables are full and everybody's talking. My only, I would say, my only complaint would be the the breakfast affair wasn't the best.
Yeah, I remember. Was that your second talk? You said you had gotten up that morning to go eat a real breakfast with
Right,
somebody.
yeah. So somebody
Yeah, I
had
thought
come
that
to the
was.
conference and wanted to talk to me about a couple of things, and I said, well, the best time for me is you know, in the morning, and earlier the better. And so we went to first watch, and I had a really good breakfast. Yeah, and by the way, it's not the Berean conference sponsors who are at fault with that. It's just you get what you get when you
Yeah.
go to a motel and they offer you a free
Hmm.
breakfast.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. So I do intermittent fasting. So after 7 p.m., I don't eat until 11 the next day. And I mean like every day. But I told Zach, these are going to be really long days and we're not eating lunch till what, 1 or 2 o'clock that first
Yeah,
day? I can't
yeah,
remember.
2 o'clock we went to lunch, and
Yeah, two
I mean,
o'clock. And
yeah,
so I told him, I was like, I have to eat breakfast or I'm going to be like shaking by the time we actually get to eat. And so I go down to eat breakfast the first morning and it's completely wiped out. There's no eggs, there's no
yeah,
sausage, there's no waffles. And I was like, you've got to be. And I'm like, is this a sign? So, but I did get to eat. They brought some stuff out eventually, but I just thought that was funny.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
you
yeah,
mentioned the people and the fellowship, and I think if I had to pinpoint, my this is my one favorite thing about Berean, and I've seen it 2 years in a row now. It's that there's just a spirit, um, if that's the word you want to use, or vibe, or whatever. But there's a feeling that's just in the room, in the facility while you're there. Everybody's just so genuinely happy to be there to learn and to fellowship and just to enjoy one another's company. And I just think that that's so cool, and it's really encouraging to me. I come back home like elevated by
sure,
that.
sure. Yeah, I mean,
So
look, we had a good. I mean, we're a fun bunch of people.
yeah,
We laughed, and everybody, all the speakers, good sense of humor. Everyone is so cordial and coming up and telling their stories, which I think is a great thing to hear. The
hmm,
the the impact. I do you do this. I do this. Quietly. Like right now, I'm in my home office. I have another office somewhere else, and you're just here, and then you hear people from all over the place saying they love the book, they changed their lives and all
hmm,
that. And I mean, it makes this worthwhile. My wife always, I always complain to my wife about, what am I doing here? What am I doing this for? And then you go out and you find out,
right.
there are people out there who are impacted by it all. And then you and Zach and these other young guys, I mean, coming up, I I think that's a great addition to what is down the road, because we got lots of people in other movements that the old guys are dying off,
Hmm.
and that is not the case in terms of what we've been discussing at a conference like this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, Zach made the comment, I think, in his second talk, basically about, meeting people from Delaware and Washington, and they're coming up saying, "Man, we watch everything you do. We appreciate that." And so obviously not to your scale, but I can relate a little bit to that because sometimes, you get kind of beat down and wonder, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the work? And then you find out that all these people are being blessed, and you're like, okay, well, there it is.
Yeah.
So
Well,
pretty cool.
Zechariah says, "Yeah, do not despise the day of small things." And
Hmm.
so this is what you always have to remember. Now, I've been doing this for what is this? This is
A day or two.
45 years.
Yeah.
Since 1980. Well, after I was in seminary, I graduated in 1979, and but I've been doing this for more than 40 years, and I've seen this probably the growth of all of this more than most of the people there. How all of this has taken place. When I used to do radio interviews, when my book Last Days Madness came out, oh, the hostility I received was remarkable. But then after a while, it got boring because people were calling in and saying, "Oh, I got your book. It was great. It changed my views and all this." And the interviews weren't fun anymore because I wasn't getting any antagonists. In fact, I did this show out in California, three nights, 3 hours each night on eschatology, all just questions from the audience. And we make it available at American Vision. It's called Gary DeMar Under Fire. So you go back and you listen to that as to what people were discussing back then, and you see how things have changed dramatically.
Mhm.
And these last, well, probably in the last 15 or 20 years, it's really been remarkable.
Well, you mentioned that, and then previously you mentioned just seeing the growth, and I think that you and Bob did was that the Gog and Magog thing released today? I think I listened to that on Revelation 20.
Right, right,
But
yeah,
you brought that up in that as well, and I think that uh, thinking back to the conference, if there's one nitpick, it's the facility, and I think it's just this conference sold out faster than it ever has, and he only seats about 100 people.
yeah.
Uh,
I
I think
know.
that there were. Well, I think you said today he probably could have got 500 there, and I
I
think that.
I I think so. I mean, and I look. I know David Curtis who puts this on. Well, I should say Kathy Curtis who puts this on because
Yeah, let's
she's
be honest.
right. She's the person who's doing all this, and but they do a great job. And of course,
Mhm.
the church itself, and they bring all their audio video guy in. I mean, which
Yeah,
Garrett does a terrific job. And so I mean, it's first class. It's first class deal.
yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the facility is only holds like 100 people.
Hmm.
And I really do believe they could get 400 or 500 people, and hopefully maybe you and I and Zach and some of these other guys can maybe work on let's figure out a way to go to a little different place, a larger venue. And look, if you have to raise the price a little bit in order to do that, I think that's just normal.
Hmm.
It's just the way it has to be,
Right. Well,
because
it's still.
more people do need to hear this. But to give you an idea, though, um, the first one I did on John MacArthur's hermeneutic, it's gotten I think 7,000 views already in 2 days.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, so there and so on the Berean side, the Berean Bible Church site, it's up to I think at least 1,000. But this is on my YouTube channel,
Mhm.
so it's up over 7,000 on my YouTube channel.
Well, I
So
think that David and them actually have a larger following on Rumble than they do YouTube. So
yeah,
there's no
yeah,
telling how many times it's been streamed on there as well. And I
yeah,
think that's kind of the fork in the road that he's in because he likes the smaller crowd for the fellowship, but then you've got hundreds of people out here who want to fellowship, and there's not room for them. So I'm glad he has to fight that fight and figure out
yeah.
which route to go there. But I'll tell you this. I don't want to spill the beans too early, but we absolutely got hammered for not having a conference in Arkansas this year. So Anyway, not to ruin it all, but just be on the lookout next summer, and we're going to try for 500. That's our goal to get in Arkansas next August. So
Yeah. Well, look, we're making headway with all of this, and I think this is
mhm,
important. And there are lots of people out there who have questions, and many of them aren't in churches where they can voice their opinions. Of course, I always tell people, look, if you're in a church where the pastor of the church holds a completely different position, you need to tread softly
mhm,
with that. And I go to a church. It's a very conservative Bible believing church, and the pastor certainly is not in any way a dispensationalist, but he's not where I am eschatologically.
yeah,
But we're really good friends. We go out to
mhm,
dinner together uh, as couples. Carol and I were at their house for Easter, and if I hear something from the pulpit regarding eschatology, I don't make a big deal of it. In fact,
right,
I don't make any deal of it. But people in the church, in fact, there are a number of people in the church who come to our church and are joining our church because they've heard me in my podcast and say, "Hey, I
mhm,
want to go to the same church Gary DeMar goes to,"
yep,
and it's solid teaching, and the fellowship is great too. And there's a wide range of newborns all the way up through people my age and a little bit older. So it's a great mix, and the fellowship there is very, very good, and we enjoy it. And of course, I only live like a half a mile from the church, which makes it a lot nicer. And
yeah.
my youngest son and his five children go there as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
So, well, I appreciate your heart in that, and it's sad to say, have to say that that's the way it ought to be. We ought to be able to agree to disagree and still
yeah,
fellowship with one another. But I think that's why at a conference like David's, the fellowship is so important and so sweet, is because most of those people do not have that. They're not welcome in their local church context. So,
yeah,
um, but anyway, overall, Gary, I thought it was great. I thought it was great last year. I enjoy David and Kathy and all the work they do and all the people that help, Jeff and Garrett and all the people you mentioned. But with that, aside from the fellowship and the awesome hotel breakfast, we also heard some great teaching. And if you want to, I'd like to kind of get into some of that a little bit.
sure, sure, yeah.
So I think the first talk of Friday night was Bob and the Bible and the Mandela effect. My thoughts on Bob. Let me ask you this, I guess, before we get into it. Did you have a favorite teaching? And which granted you missed the best one, so that doesn't count. But
Oh yeah, just to let everybody know, I had an 11-hour drive back.
whew,
And like you, I have to work for a living,
right,
and I have to every time I go on one of these trips, I still have to do my 2 articles a week, 3 podcasts,
yeah,
edit books, and stuff like that I had to get. But I am going to listen to it because I did a short uh, critique of what's his name? Tell me,
Sam
Sam,
Waldron.
well, Waldron, yeah. And I debated him a number of years ago uh, on Revelation out at Reno, Nevada. Him and premillennialist Jim Hamilton. So no, I want to listen to yours, and that's the
Yeah,
nice thing about this as well. That
right.
these talks are online, and give us all the sites where people can go in order to watch these.
I think Berean Bible Church's YouTube page. I mean, that's where I've been seeing them, is on their
Yeah,
YouTube page. And you can just go to YouTube and search Berean Bible Church and find it. But I know they're on Rumble too. You can
right.
probably look on Facebook or other social media and find it that way. But I was just giving you a hard time, Gary. Or some of the people watching this don't know I spoke last, so Gary missed my last talk. So that's why I said that. But of the 9 that you heard, what do you think was your favorite one?
Oh man, I they were all different
Yeah.
in that respect, and they were generally I go to I'm saying this out loud here, but generally I go to some conferences and I just say I don't think I want to listen to this guy, and I'm going to make some excuse, got some phone call I got to make or something like that. I sat through all of them, and they
Hmm.
were all great.
Yeah.
And all the speakers are good speakers too. It's not like they're just delivering some content. They're all good speakers. I mean,
Hmm.
Bob is certainly animated, and Zach, I thought did a great job. He's so self-effacing. I told him, I said, stop apologizing for your comments that you're making here. You're laying these things out for people to give
Well,
them the thing
Gary,
to think about them.
he
Don't
he hammered
apologize.
85 people in the room. He ought to apologize to some of them.
No, they were all great, and I can't
Yeah.
say you know which was better. I would say that my two were the best ones I had
There you
listened
go.
to. Yeah,
That's a safe answer. Okay. Well, good. If you're not answering, I'm not answering. Let's get
yeah.
rolling then. Let's talk about Bob, the Bible, and the Mandela effect. I thought it was super interesting. Just one thing that stood out, and I think, did this come from your Bible quiz, your Sunday school Bible quiz about Samson, who cut Samson's hair?
Uh, I don't know if it was. I don't know if that was the inspiration for it,
Okay.
but I've never. Bob did a great job by the Mandela effect, which a lot of people say, what's the Mandela effect? And it
Hmm.
simply is you hear something over and over again on television or read about it, and you think it really happened, and then you go back and you check it out and say, well, that's not the way. I
Hmm.
mean, this is what I remember about it, but then when you go and you check and you find out it never happened, never
Yep.
happened that way, and it was based upon that Nelson Mandela uh, supposedly had died in prison and so forth. And the reality is he didn't die in prison, but
Yeah.
so many people think that he did. A name was attached to it, and it's called the Mandela effect. And there is a lot of it. One of the ones he used was the cornucopia in the
The fruit of the
what is
loom.
it? Yeah, Fruit of the Loom,
Yeah.
or like Fruit Loops. How's Fruit Loops spelled? I think it's F-R-O-O-T and not F-R-U-I-T. And
Uh-huh.
there are lots of these out there that people misremember something, and it's the same thing about the Bible. And so I typically give this little Bible quiz, especially when I'm talking about eschatology, because a lot of people think the Bible says certain things, but when you go back and actually check on it, you find out, well, that's not what it says at all. And one of the
Hmm.
questions was, who cut off Samson's hair? And
Yes.
most people will say Delilah, but yet
Oh,
when you go look at the text, it says that she called for a man to do the hair cutting.
that's right. And when he pointed that out, I was like, I said Delilah with, like, from my chest, you know what I mean, with confidence. And then he showed the verse, and I was like, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
and then later he did the whole, what animal is it that lies down with the lamb? And everybody's like, well, a lion.
yeah, the
Everybody
lion.
knows that. And then
Yeah,
he shows it, and it's a wolf.
right.
And so
Yeah,
it's really interesting to see him point that out, because we do that. We're human, we're prone to error, but if we're not careful and going back and checking our sources, it's easy to fall into that. But I love the way that he segued that into this dispensationalism and essentially just tearing it to pieces with the, what was it, Zephaniah stuff.
right.
So
Oh, yeah. I mean, and this again, this is what I do and what you do and what others are doing here. Let's go actually look at the text of Scripture and see what it says. And one of the other questions was, Noah's true or false? Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat, and most people say, "Well, yeah, and that's what I've always heard." And I'm sure but when it landed on the mountains of Ararat.
mhm.
So, and those are little things, obviously, from Scripture. But it's if we don't if we're not getting the little things, Sunday school type lessons right, and what are we doing with the bigger things? Like, where in the Bible does it say that the church is going to be taken off the earth
That's right.
before, during, or after a 7-year period?
Mhm.
And a lot of people would think of on that a little bit and say, well, First Thessalonians 4. So, okay, let's look at that First Thessalonians 4. Does it say anything about 7 years? Well, no. Does it use the word church? No. Is the Antichrist mentioned there? No. And so, start thinking about this. Or what's the biblical definition of Antichrist?
Mhm.
And most people, they think, well, everybody knows what that is. And I said, no, I want the biblical definition. in the biblical definition is someone who denies that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh.
Yep.
That's the biblical definition of Antichrist, 2 John 7. Where in the book of Revelation do you find the word Antichrist? No one's ever thought of that before. It's not in there anywhere.
Yep.
Where in the book of Revelation do you find 7 years mentioned? Because it's supposed to be about 7 years from Revelation chapter 4, verse 1 through Revelation, I guess, 19. And well, it's not found there anywhere. And so these are questions that you have to ask in order to get people to start thinking about their position. The very texts that are needed in order to support particular doctrines regarding eschatology, there aren't any passages that actually support the claim. And that's the starting point with all of this that I do, and Bob was doing the same thing. Look, we've heard these things all of our lives, but then let's take a look at Scripture and see what it actually says.
That's right. That's the plight, is getting people to funnel back to Scripture as the starting point rather than just a reference point to read it through the newspaper. I like how Bob quoted the guy that he hadn't read Zephaniah in 10 years, but here's what it says. And anyway,
Travis, that's embarrassing.
It is.
First of all, to admit it, and second of all, not to have actually read the passage and studied it, and yet to come out and pontificate about how that's applicable to today. I mean, that's horrible. That's horrible. Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "You've heard it said," and Jesus deals with that same argument. You've heard this said, but now let me take you and let's look at the text of Scripture on this. So this isn't a new deal. And then you've got Mark chapter 7, where Jesus is talking to the religious leaders and how they nullify the word of God by their traditions. And so that's what this is all about. All we're doing is calling people back and looking at the text, see what it says. And if you want to disagree on the interpretation, that's okay. But let's look and see what the text actually says.
That's right. That's right. And that shouldn't be an issue. I mean, you wouldn't think when you're talking to a Bible-believing Christian that to say, let's examine the Bible, that shouldn't be problematic. So,
I would think so.
But Bob did a fantastic job. He also, Gary, he had a slide in there of a guy with long hair and a beard that he said looked like me. I guess I was the inspiration for that. And everybody got a pretty good laugh. But I was walking in the hall probably an hour and a half later, and I walked by this lady, and she punched me in the arm. She said, "Hey, Zeph," so I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, in fact, Bob wanted me to call you Zeph on this interview. So
of course he did.
But the thing is, the guy had long hair, and like you, and I don't see it. It's
I've barely got any hair, much less long hair.
Well,
and it's fading fast.
At your age, I still had a pretty good head of hair, but not anymore.
Some of us age like wine, and some of us age like milk. That's all I can tell you. But anyway, you kind of got into just then talking about the Revelation stuff and things that aren't there that people think are there. You kind of got into your first talk a little bit with was it John MacArthur's failed hermeneutic?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, the failed hermeneutics of John MacArthur's dispensational worldview. And so you opened your talk with a clip of Johnny Mack basically saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically saying if you're going to be consistent in your hermeneutic, you're going to be a premillennial dispensationalist. And then you proceeded for the next 45 minutes to essentially tear that to pieces.
Yeah. And some guy criticized me it was a response to the video. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about with all of this. I'm just quoting what John MacArthur said. And the clip is there. Anybody watching it knows the clip is there. It's only like 3 minutes and 15 seconds. And it was at a G3 conference. And then I went through every little thing he said, and I compared it with his claim that if you go back to Genesis, if you believe in 6-day creationism, you have to follow the same hermeneutic in Genesis as you do in Revelation. I said, okay, let's put that to the test. It's a literal sun, literal moon, literal stars, literal beasts of the field, literal man, literal woman. So now let's go to the book of Revelation and see if false stars falling in or being thrown down in Revelation chapter 6, are they literal physical stars? And there's a giant woman in chapter 12, and she's standing on the moon, and she's draped with the sun, and she's got 12 crown of 12 stars on her head. Are those physical, literal stars? And then he mentions all the things he said that were in the book of Revelation, and I went
Mhm.
through and said none of them are there.
Yep,
You've
none
got
of
to
them.
import those from other books of the Bible, but you can't find them in Revelation itself. And so now you have to go back and look at all those things individually. It was just a good lesson in evaluating a person's hermeneutical model and
Mhm.
forcing them to live consistently with it. And one of the other examples I used was dealing with atheists. Are you a consistent atheist based upon the fundamentals of evolutionary atheistic evolution? Can you account for morality with today? And I wrote a book related to that called "Why It Might Be Okay to Eat Your Neighbor." If atheism is right, can anything be wrong? And so what I did do in that book is take the operating assumptions of the evolutionary atheistic model and force them to live consistently with it. And I cite all of these different examples that are out there. And
Oh,
that's what we do in terms of eschatology. We're
mhm.
looking at the text. What does the text say?
That's right. I'll have to check that out. That sounds like an interesting read.
Yeah,
Um,
it's why it might be okay to eat your neighbor. Um,
okay.
and uh,
And
and
we
you can
can
get
get that at American
American
Vision?
Vision, AmericanVision.org. All of my books are on
Okay.
AmericanVision.org.
All right. Well, yeah, I really enjoyed that first talk and the way that you handled that. We skipped over Zach. His first one was the house built without hands. And in that one, I believe he took the Daniel 2 stone that was cut without human hands, and then he went to the context of the New Testament and showed Ezekiel that the temple's being built on the foundations of the apostles and Christ as a cornerstone, and just kind of labored that out. Um, I thought it was excellent. I mean, did you have any immediate thoughts on Zach's first one?
Well, I know I sat with Zach, and he didn't think he did a very good job, and I said you got your point across. It was great.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's important to continually show that the New Testament context for things is based upon the Old Testament, and you can see this in Matthew chapter 21, where the crushing of the of I don't have my Bible with me here, and you say where's that language? Where's that language coming from? And of course, it's coming from Daniel. And then if you the response of the religious leaders said, "Oh, Jesus is talking about us,"
Hmm.
and then you get to Matthew chapter 23, and sure enough, Jesus is just going through point by point by point by
Yeah.
point, showing it was that particular generation that this was going to come down on. So now you have um, pulling, the material from Daniel, and then of course Jesus says, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it back up again. And he was talking about himself. And so what Zach is doing is connecting all of this with the
Hmm.
Old Testament.
Yep.
It's not like the Jews said, "Oh, we never heard this before." Well, they did hear all this before. It was all there. Jesus comes on the scene and shows he's the personification of all that.
Yep. So Zach essentially went through and he established a thread that ran from the law and the prophets all the way to Revelation. And he showed that Daniel's stone and Isaiah 2's mountain and the body and the temple, all of these things were ultimately pointing head to and fulfilled in Christ.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, I thought he did a great job. But Gary, I asked you for 15 to 20 minutes and we're at the 29 mark. So let's step on the gas because I don't want you mad at me.
No,
Um,
okay.
Bob's second one was Israel, Gaza, and the world's end prophecy in Zephaniah. So I might have my wires crossed because I thought his first one dealt with Zephaniah too. So maybe I got that backwards.
Oh, now I can't remember
I'm gonna have to go
all of
back
them.
and listen to it again.
Yeah.
Which when you listen to 10 hours of teaching in 2.5 days, it's kind of a blur. And I'm
Oh
only
yeah.
about
Yeah. I'm coming home and I'm telling Carol, I said, and I'd say, was it Zach who said this, or
Yeah.
no, who, and it didn't matter because, what everyone would said was, gelled. We were essentially, we didn't sit down ahead of time and say, "Hey, let's
Hmm.
coordinate what we're going to talk about." It all gelled because we were following essentially the same hermeneutic.
Hmm.
And one of the things that Bob has been working on is we tend to skip the post exile period and just jump over
Hmm.
the intertestamental period, as well as stepping over, and we, with light speed, we jump to the future, and we miss what happened after the exile,
Hmm.
and we miss what happened the during Jesus' ministry in AD 70. And I think one of the points that Bob makes, and it's the point that I make too, we as preterists, not everything is about AD 70. And I think Bob did a great job showing that with Zephaniah and some of these other passages, that there was a historical context to what
Hmm.
was going on there, because especially in Zephaniah, you got the time indicators again, and how inconsistent a lot of the commentaries are, and dispensationalists say, "Oh yeah, yeah, this took place then," but there's an already not yet feature to all this in the distant future, and and that's the convenient cop out. This already and not yet. I would say,
Right.
already and then personified in the person and work of Christ,
Hmm.
because Luke 24, Jesus goes through the whole Old Testament and tells
That's
this,
right.
all of this is leading up to me. This
Yep.
is what this is all about. It's not leading up to the Jewish nation. It's leading to me. I'm the Israel out of Egypt. I called my
Hmm.
son, and so Hosea puts it in historical context, but Jesus then becomes the fulfillment of that. And Bob covered that as well.
That's right. And well, that really tethers well to Zach's message on the house without hands because it's the exact same concept. They
Exactly.
had
Yes.
all these texts which ultimately pointed to the true temple, the true city in
Yeah.
Christ. But yeah, I appreciated what Bob did there too, because that's an area, just telling on myself that I'm pretty deficient in as far as my understanding of the Bible, which is that immediate fulfillment or historical context, however you want to phrase it. And so what he did there, showing the immediate fulfillment and where else this language is used. I think that's the one where, and again, I'm getting both of them. They're running together on me, but in one of them, he chased the animal imagery, to show that it was people. Maybe he went to Jeremiah or somewhere with that.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
necessary and it's needed if we're going to consistently, understand the text. So,
Yeah.
and another thing about Bob is what I've learned about him, because I've heard him speak in person, I guess 3 times now. And I know that when he gets up there, number one, he's going to have the best slideshow of anybody, which Rick Welch gave him a run for his money this year. I'll give Rick that. But
Yeah.
number two, Bob is so thoroughly prepared. He just does a great job, and he's so easy to follow in the way
Yeah.
that he explains things. Like you never have to wonder what is he talking about. Bob is
Yeah.
just very clear.
Yeah. He
So,
he he spends a great deal of time. Every time we when I was on Facebook, he would send me things. Oh, I got to get back to my talk, because what he does, he practices it to such an extent that he wants to be within the 45-minute
uh-huh.
uh, range there. He doesn't want to go over. So he's timed it. I don't do that. I cut and add as I go, as I look at the time,
Uh-huh.
and I may leave some things out and I may put some things in. But I'm very cautious about. I want to get this. I'd rather people say, "Well, I could have. I wish you could have spoken longer. I wanted to hear more,"
Right.
rather than someone saying, "When will this guy shut up?"
Yep.
And Bob always does a great job. I think everybody really stuck within
Mhm.
the time limit.
So I'm not smart enough to speak on the fly like you and Zach and those other guys are. So I manuscript everything,
Yeah,
and I know by my word count how long it's going to take me. So because I know, and everybody, I got hammered for talking fast, and I just think that's funny because when I listen on YouTube or like today your podcast or whatever, I listen normally at 1.75 speed, so it's really fast. So I listen fast and I tend to talk fast, And especially, and I still get a little nervous here and there speaking in front of people, and that helps speed you up a little bit too. So I did talk fast, but if you go back and listen to them, you can slow it down. YouTube will allow you to do that. So,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
tell everybody, I'm like the song Eastbound and Down. I got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So
Yeah.
I got to spit it out within my hour. But
Well,
anyway,
there's go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was going to move on. Go ahead and make your point.
Well, having done this for a very, very long time, uh, I, I, there, people aren't where I am in all of this. And as a result of that, I have to assume that my audience, many in the audience, don't know the particulars of all this. Lots of people who have come to the preterist position have come to it in terms of a reaction to dispensationalism. And so that's okay. So that's deficient. Now that's not enough. Now you have to build a positive hermeneutic. And I think one of the reasons why these people come to these conferences, they want to know how to build a positive hermeneutic because they still have questions. I get questions all the time from people. Gary, you said this. Well, how do you understand this given your hermeneutic? And so I always have to remember that's where people are. I don't know where lots of people are. Now, one of the things I regret not doing was to find out how many new people were at this conference who had never been at a Berean conference before. Maybe
I think
David
there
could
were
tell us.
several. I think there were several, honestly, like 20 or 30 maybe new people.
Yeah.
Which a lot of the people that usually come couldn't get tickets because it sold out so fast. So,
Yeah. I
but
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
there were a lot of new faces.
You
Now,
snooze,
Rick,
you lose.
that's right. Now, Rick, he did a two-part deal. So both of his talks ran together. Not ran together, but they went together. You know what I mean?
Right.
He did
Yes.
an A and B. I thought his opening in the first one was absolutely hilarious, where he told the true story with the fake names, just as a
Oh, I know.
just
In
as a
fact,
warning.
I
I
just
think
saw it online here, and I need to show it to my wife because it was one of the best things I've seen.
oh, he
It's
put
really
that together flawlessly. Like it was
yeah.
great. Just a warning. I think my wife and kids just got home, so this might get a little rowdy here shortly.
Oh,
But that's okay. But anyway, Rick's point essentially in his entire thing was just to build the case. He talked about disunity in the church, which is what his funny slideshow and story was about. And then he talked about the world that Jesus entered into and how there were just divisions upon divisions. And then, in part two, he kind of swung more into how are we supposed to be? We're one flock with one shepherd. And then he showed obviously the pictures with him and Eric and some of the work that they had done, the North Carolina stuff. And it was really just a good message. And Rick's central theme was we should not let these petty doctrinal differences separate us or keep us from loving one another. The thrust of it was unity. And I think that it's just such a much needed message, not just in my own circles, but in the church as a whole. I remember going through the Reform thing 7 years ago and getting hammered for being a Calvinist. And now I'm hammered for being a preterist. And it's like, why can't we just agree to disagree and continue to study and sharpen and love one another, And I think
yeah.
that's really what Rick's big crescendo was.
Yeah. And look, and to add to this, and my second talk was kind of like this is that, okay, you, this position, this isn't just an academic exercise. Now you're out of one position, you're in a new position. What are you going to do about it? What should we do? I mean, the theme of the conference is how should we then live? And I think what Rick was doing was saying, okay, how should you then live? What Eric and his wife were doing, and what the Berean Church was helping out with what was happening in North Carolina, and I have the Amish are went into North Carolina and taking their skills and helping to rebuild. You want to bring people to Christ, you do it not only with words, but you do it with actions.
Right.
These people, and another thing to give you an example of this that happened there. We went to this restaurant, Pirates Cove.
Yeah, you
I don't
mentioned
know.
this in your second talk, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean you could just tell the people
Mm-hmm.
who are serving us, and man, they're working hard because there were a lot of
Oh
us,
yeah.
a lot of food, And even when the food was late for a variety of reasons, you didn't hear anybody complaining about it at
Yep.
all. And everybody was very generous in terms of tipping. And so, David had said they've been coming there for years, and I guarantee you, they know it's hard work, but they love the people from the Berean Church in these conferences
Hmm.
because of the people. That
That's
makes a
right.
difference. It's a testimony to those that works at the restaurant.
It's interesting hearing you say that, and I agree completely. It was a really sweet crowd, about 100 people at lunch.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were absolutely slammed. But it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but contrast that with what you hear with most people that are in food service is they hate working Sundays, and that you ask them why, it's because of the church crowd. You know, and on the one hand, you've got an excellent testimony for Christ just in the way that people are patient and treat their help and so forth. And then on the other hand, you've got an awful testimony for Christ, and it's supposed to be the same people. So I agree. We ought to question the way that we live our lives. And I think you put it as self governance or self government, and that's where we start, and then move over into the other
Yeah.
areas of life. And I guess I'm getting into your second talk now. What was it called? I can't remember.
Um,
How does eschatology impact worldview living?
right. Yes. Yeah.
And you said something, and I'm paraphrasing. This is the TDV, but you said essentially, I don't want an eschatology that what you say is in a void or self-contained, but you said I want an eschatology that permeates all of life.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I got started in the eschatology thing because I had written a three books in the 1980s, 82, 84, and 86 called God and Government. Now you're way too young for this, but think about that. That was 40 some years ago, and we had just gotten off of the Jimmy Carter presidency. Who Jimmy Carter ran as a born again Christian, and that was a new thing for everybody. Billy Graham even wrote a book called How to Be Born Again. Like, that's not the way it works, Billy. But anyway, and the media didn't, they had no idea this because there was never an evangelical voting bloc. You had the Roman Catholics who were a voting bloc, of course, and then you had the liberal establishment and Jewish voting bloc. But you never had a basic Christian fundamentalist voting bloc, and that's when Jimmy Carter, no, I mean Jerry Falwell, came in with a moral majority, and Ronald Reagan won in 1980. And I wanted to make sure that people understood that was just the beginning of what could have been some fundamental change. And Christians need to understand that government is not equal to politics. And so I wrote a series of books called God and Government, that God was the governor of all things, and then undergirding the family government, church government, and civil government was something called self-government. That is, if you look, if you're not a good governor of yourself, you're not going to be a
Mhm.
good governor of your family. You're not going to be a good governor in the church. You're not going to be a good governor in the civil sphere. And the Apostle Paul says, hey, one of the qualifications for deacons and elders is a person has to be able to govern his own self
That's
and,
right.
and govern his family. You can't govern your own family well, you shouldn't be governing other people.
Hmm.
So I got into all of this because of that, but invariably someone would get up and say, why are we bothering with all of this? Because Jesus is coming soon. And so I started dealing with the eschatological side of things
Yeah.
as a result of those types of questions.
Well, that one's a little more fresh on my mind because I listened to it again today. I'm trying to listen to all of them again, and that one was the one that I listened to today. And you brought up something that I appreciated. You were talking about essentially discipline and work in growth in theology and life and so forth. And you used the analogy of weightlifting, and you
Yeah.
talked about, was it your brother that had a 110-pound barbell set?
Yeah, my
And
dad bought him a 110-pound barbell set, and because he was kind of picked on a little bit, and he's
Mhm,
3 years older than I am, and he really never gravitated toward it. I did,
mhm.
and I got pretty good at it. I mean,
Yeah.
I competed in Olympic weightlifting, press, snatch, and clean and jerk.
Oh, wow.
I was the Pennsylvania state record holder in the shot my senior year, was ranked fifth in the nation. So I mean, it was I coached a kid on my street who uh, ended up throwing 70 feet, broke all my records, was national champion
Wow.
his senior year, and was the first high school kid to throw 70 feet and with a 12-pound shot, and then 70 feet with a 16-pound.
That's
And
impressive.
so, yeah, I still lift weights,
Mhm.
and not like I
Well,
used
but
to, obviously. And, barbell sets, they have 1 1/4 pound plates, 2.5s, 5s,
mhm,
10s, 12.5s, 25s, 35s, 45s. And that incrementalism is important because especially when you're young, you start lifting, I'm getting stronger. What do I do? Well, I needed more weight. So you put on maybe a 2.5 on each side. You keep doing that. Pretty soon you're bench pressing close to 400 pounds when you're 17 years old. And how did I do that? Well, I look back at the chart and it was just incremental.
that's right. One
Uh,
one rep
you
at a
know,
time.
one rep at a time, sets,
Yep,
consistency. And it's the same in anything. And
that's right.
Kristen, the heretic chick, we were talking at breakfast one morning, and we were talking about a memory. I wrote a book on memory called Memory Mechanics, and her her children took the Suzuki method of the violin. And the first thing that they learned was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And you think how simple that is, but you keep doing that and adding to it, and
Mhm.
pretty soon you're playing classical stuff,
That's
and
right.
that's the same with everything. Unfortunately, too many people quit when
Mhm.
it gets a little harder. You say, "Well, I can't do this." And if we're going to make a change in our culture, we got into this mess a little bit at a time, and we're going
That's
to have
right.
to get out of it with
Yeah.
the same process.
Well, we live in a microwave fast food culture where everything is
Yeah,
right now, and unfortunately, that's not the way that change works, and that's not the way that growth works,
right. Yeah,
in any
absolutely.
area. But like
Yeah,
you said,
I put on weight, 1 ounce at a time, and then all of a sudden, ooh, wait a minute, that turned into pounds,
yeah,
and then trying to diet, it's gonna come off 1 ounce at a time, and,
that's right.
I don't know if you have ever see Leanne Morgan, who's a comedian. She's really quite funny, and she gets up there and talks about how she needed to lose 40 pounds. She says, "No, I can do that in, 30 days or so." Yeah, right. It just doesn't happen that way. And then she
No,
says, "Oh, I'll just try Weight Watchers again." And then she says, like, I was so successful with it. Well, she wasn't successful with it because she didn't keep it. She didn't keep it. She didn't follow
right.
the system. And it's the same in everything. We get where we are incrementally. We get out of it incrementally, but you have to persist and follow it over
Mhm.
time. And you begin to see, oh, I've changed my life by just following some very simple procedures.
No, that's good. Diligence is a dirty word in our society.
Yeah, yeah.
But the next talk, Gary, was Zach's second one, Acts 20, learning from the layout of Luke, and he took us to the third floor of the upper room and talked about what was his name, Eutychus. I don't want to say uterus, but
I mean, that I can say uh, we just had a lot of fun. I mean, it
yeah,
was everybody. When you're laughing, you're having a good time here, and we laughed a lot. There's a lot of seriousness in terms of the talk, but we did laugh. I thought that was funny, and that was a great one. Taking an example that you know Paul's preaching late in the evening, and Eutychus falls out of the window, and he said, "Look,
mhm,
don't take that to say that preaching long means someone's
right,
going to die." And it was very helpful again on application of scripture and paying
mhm,
close attention to what the text says, and don't apply it the beyond what it was meant to be put in the Bible to show. And it wasn't shown. It wasn't in there to say preachers don't preach a long time.
that's
And
right.
and then Zach goes up and he says he doesn't preach more than 35 minutes.
Uh huh.
And I don't think he's based it on that text. I base teaching on just the effects of absorption, of how much a person can absorb.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
then the other side of it is to use examples to connect things people know with things that they don't know, and use lots of illustrations. And so, yeah, another very, very good talk.
Well, and that was something he brought up. You mentioned his first rule, which was don't go straight to application. Well, his second one was use everything you know about the Bible when you bring it in. And
Yeah.
something that I appreciated a lot from that talk was he made the point that He used to say it took me 15 hours to prep this sermon or 10 hours to this one. And now he's like, that's not true. I've been prepping for this message since I was 10 years old and got saved
Yeah,
on the second row at Calvary Baptist Church, because
yeah.
everything built, it's just like what we were just talking about. You're building on yesterday every day.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
So,
people ask me, "Gary, how do you know all this stuff?" And, look, I've been around a long time,
yeah.
and I'm very curious. I like to learn new things all the time, and of course, repetition.
Hmm.
And so it's, yeah, and it's called the Bible, the book, 66 individual books, but it is one book.
Hmm.
And in order for you to understand the whole Bible, I mean, Paul talks, to Timothy, and it was his grandmother and his mother who taught him those things and equipped him to, all scripture is God breathed and profitable for correction, reproof, for training in righteousness, that the man of God might be equipped for every good work. And it's not by osmosis here. It's something if you got to go to the Bible in order to figure it out, and you got to use it and think over it and cogitate over it, apply it, figure out what this means in this situation. And in this, you become. I can't watch anything anymore without seeing it in terms of biblical terms. And I gave the example in my second talk. I was reading this biography by David McCullough on the Wright brothers. I was reading the Wright brothers and everything that was going on with the Wright brothers. I saw all this biblical application.
Hmm.
And the Wright brothers grew up in a Christian home. Their father was a minister, and they didn't fly on Sunday. And you could just tell in a lot of their communication, which was almost all by letter, all of the kind of, they weren't preachy about it. It was just, hey, this is just the way things work. And they studied the birds, and they studied the flight patterns of birds and all that sort of thing. And I was reading the book, I kept coming across things I could use in the talk in order to make the point, and that's what I did. There's just so many great things in there. Their persistence, even in terms of failure.
Yeah.
Failure was a lead way to we've learned. What have we learned from failure? A lot of people, they fail at something and they quit and they give up, and yet failure is in fact a method for teaching and progress.
Yeah. It's probably the best teacher.
Yeah,
Um, you said something in there, and I think it was Wilbur, right, that made the comment that man won't fly for another 50 years. And then
yeah,
was it 2 years later, they were making regular flights. And then he made the comment, I've learned not to trust myself as a
yeah,
prophet or something like that. I thought
yeah,
that was
yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah,
But
if you haven't read the book, there are lots of books on the Wright brothers. I think McCullough's is the best because it's breezier, more personal,
mhm.
and it's shorter. There's not all the details of some of these other ones, and there's an audible version of it too. So I got the hardcover plus the audible. In fact, I finished listening to it on my drive up to Chesapeake, Virginia.
Okay. Well, Gary, that's all of them except for my two. I think we've covered them all. If I forgot anybody, I apologize. But in my first one, I talked about Ezekiel 37. And I really took a quote from James Jordan in your book, Prophecy Wars. I read that in January, and I remember reading that and I just screenshot it because I thought, man, that's so good. And that was really my springboard for the view. And I wanted to do that because you see so many extremes and not only that passage, but like Isaiah 65 and several others. But you've got
Yeah,
one camp that wants to tether all this way back here and say it was done with then. It's not relevant to anything on the right side of the book.
right.
Then you've got another camp that says either that's us right now or this is some future Israel thing. And I'm sitting here saying, well, you're both right.
Yeah.
It's right in the sense that, yeah, there was a historical fulfillment, but it was being recapitulated in the New Testament. So it was typological. And that's what I sought to do in that message. And I don't know if I muddied it up or not, but that was the goal anyway. So,
Yeah, there's always an applicational side of things. Even though something is fulfilled, there's an applicational side for it. I mean, Jesus died on a cross nearly 2,000 years ago, but there's an
that's right.
applicational side to it. Just because
Mhm.
that was all those prophecies were fulfilled in the person and work of Christ doesn't mean there's no application to it today. And so and what is it, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, that these things were written for our instruction,
Yep.
upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And so you can go back and look through Israel's history and preach from the Old Testament and say, you see what happened to Israel. Then you get to the book of Revelation, you got those chapters 2 and 3, and you got those 7 churches. Hey, the same thing that happened to Israel can happen to you, and I can make the same case
Mhm.
today. The same thing that happened to Israel can happen to us. It doesn't mean it's a double fulfillment. It's simply the application. The Bible lays out principles in terms of application, and we have solid examples of the failures. I mean, go to 1 Samuel chapter 8. We want a king like all the other nations, and God
Mhm.
says, "You want one? You got one." And so we can apply that today politically. You get what you vote for, but if you don't
Right.
have the basic fundamental principles, you're going to vote for somebody who you think is going to be a political savior, and there are no political saviors. And we know that because the Bible makes it clear. And by the time you get to the book of Revelation, you find them to be beasts.
Yep.
And there are beasts today, political beasts today. Doesn't mean it's a fulfillment of Revelation chapter 13. It's an application of Revelation 13.
Yep. That's good, Gary. And my last talk, again, was on, I think I titled it Answering Dr. Sam Waldron. And so I've actually, if I can do this without knocking stuff off my desk, I've got the book beside me. So this is
Yes.
Sam's
Yeah.
book, The Doctrine of the Last Things. And he wrote a chapter against some of me and mine. I'll word this delicately for your sake. But anyway, I just took some things in there, and he attacked both partial and full preterists in the chapter. He used J. Stuart Russell's The Parousia kind of for his springboard. And what I really wanted to do in that one is just take his arguments and show why the way that he splits the Olivet Discourse is inconsistent. And really, that was the crux of it. And then there were other chapters where he put other things at the time of that fulfillment. And again, I'm wording this delicately on purpose, but I just wanted to show his inconsistency and say essentially what you did with John MacArthur and say, look, if we're going to be consistent, this is what you have to do with this. So yeah, you'll have to go back and watch that one. And
Yeah,
let me know what
I
you think.
will. And yeah, it's, like I say, I debated him out in Reno, Nevada a number of years ago, but it was on the book of Revelation and not on this. But in that book, it's more of a systematic theology. It's not
Mhm.
really exegetical like I like to do. And you're right. I mean, you read through it and I think, man, come on, you can do a better job of this. Russell's
Mhm.
book, like he's the only preterist out there that you could deal with
Right.
on all of this. And I think that's a mistake. Look, I have a little deal when you debate somebody. You have to find the strongest argument for the other side, and you have to understand your weakest argument,
Mhm.
and they're usually the same. And you can always build a case for a position by not representing the position correctly or comprehensively. I just got this book yesterday by John Piper, which he's written a book on the coming of Christ, and he has some chapters in there where he deals with kind of some of the preterist stuff, and he does the same kind of thing. Well, yeah,
Is it Come Lord Jesus?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I've got that
uh,
one. I haven't finished it.
yeah. I read it, but it's the Sam Waldron approach. Yeah,
Mhm.
some of those things apply to AD 70, but some of these things apply to the second coming, which that's a definitional issue as well. And then verse 36 obviously is talking about some distant period of time,
Yep.
yet does not go through the rest of Matthew chapter 24 and part of chapter 25, where the definition of long time, where the master goes away and comes back to the same people, it's
That's
the
right.
same master. To say that anyway, it's sloppy. It's just
Mhm.
not for somebody who's teaching in a seminary. It's just a little too sloppy for me. But
I I
John
actually
Murray, John Murray took a similar position in his commentary on Matthew 24 and
Mhm.
25. So
I
it's a
actually said that
pretty
in my
typical.
talk,
Yeah.
and I don't, and I said it, and I didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, but I said this was a lazy effort from Dr. Waldron. He is capable of doing better than that.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
mean, it just made me question why he even included that chapter. Why would you even go there if that's the best you're going to give it, But
He
nonetheless,
had to. He had to go there. He had to
yeah,
go there,
I
and
think
all
a
he
lot
had to
of them
do is
have to.
right. Anybody who reads the book is immediately going. Sam Waldron says this, so therefore, no one's going to go and check out these guys to see what
Mhm.
their stuff is says. But someone goes and picks up Russell's book, they're in for a shock. I mean, it's remember when Russell's the story of Russell's book. Um, Walt Hibbert, who he had a book company called Great, I think it was Great Christian Books, or no, it was I think Puritan Reformed, and this was before Amazon and so forth, and he sold a lot of books, Reformed books, and he went to Baker Bookhouse and he said, "Hey, I've got this book by this J. Stuart Russell. You guys ought to reprint this." And so Baker Bookhouse reprinted it, and I offered an endorsement of it. Ken Gentry offered an endorsement of it, and R.C. Sproul offered an endorsement of it.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Gentry and
yes,
Sproul endorsed the pair of sets.
yes.
Did
And
did they did they take it back down the road, or is it?
no, Ken Gentry hasn't taken it back. In fact, Ken
Huh.
sent me. I wish I could find it. His they were all shortened a little bit, but his longer version was this book is really significant, and you need to get it. And it's basically verse by verse going through scripture, taking these passages and putting them in the preterist perspective. But Russell wasn't the first one to do this. There was another guy who wrote a book in the same year with the same title. I think his name was Israel Warren. What was the same kind of book? We just published a book. It's called Eschatology by Samuel Lee. It's a much shorter book. There are lots of books in the 19th century where people were
Mhm.
asking the same questions.
Yeah.
And so it's a little disingenuous to pick out just Russell's book because there are other books. But my guess is Sam Waldron doesn't know about these other books.
Yeah.
And
I
it's,
said that too in the talk. I sure
yeah,
did, because I was, he even made the comment that he was interacting with a recent work, or he said that this was growing in recent years. That's what it was. And then he quotes a book from the 1800s, and I just made the point this work was put out 70 years before cable television.
yeah,
So we have a different definition of what recent is.
yeah.
Why didn't
And
he?
Sproul, yeah. And R.C. Sproul wrote, The Last Days According to Jesus.
Mhm.
And R.C. Sproul, the thing about this, R.C. Sproul actually held a conference. Not, it wasn't a conference. He did have a conference on eschatology. I think it was 1999 that I spoke at. Ken Gentry spoke at too. And he had a kind of a confab with full preterists and sat around the table to discuss the topic. Didn't
Hmm.
dismiss it, discussed it. Why was that okay for Sproul to do 26 years ago, but we can't do that today? And no one was described as a heretic. Andrew Sandlin actually wrote a letter criticizing Sproul for not critiquing full preterism more vehemently in his book, Last Days According to Jesus. And Baker Bookhouse published The Last Days According to Jesus. And so, and I was asking the same questions back in the 1990s, and no one ever said anything about it to me. I mean, I think Andrew Sandlin wrote something to me about it. And there's a lot of history to this that many people just don't know anything about.
Mhm.
But right now, where to question some of these historic points, makes you a heretic. This is what the creeds say, and this is what the confessions say, and I want to know, well, how did the creeds get to the confessional statement? Where's the exegesis for that? And as far as I
Yeah.
know, we don't have any.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that that you just shared, so that's interesting. But I'm not surprised, because R.C. Sproul was probably like drinking scotch and smoking a Marlboro Red, and nobody messes with that guy. So that's
Uh,
why he got a pass, Gary.
yeah. Well, he was. There's some people who are kind of untouchable,
Yeah.
And RC was such an affable guy.
Hmm.
But he was he was sharp. He was sharp. He was a great one of probably the best teachers around.
Yeah.
And very, very popular and big ministry. And
Well.
look, RC was laying it out there. Here's the stuff. Take a look at it. He's
Hmm.
got commentaries on Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You can read his commentaries on those books of the
I think
Bible.
I've got all three of those right over
Yeah,
there.
yeah. The Olivet Discourse does a very good job. Don't agree with him on everything,
Hmm.
but I don't agree on some of the things I wrote 20 some years ago.
Right. Yep.
And I
Well,
just didn't know well enough in order to make make a comment about it.
and it would be scary if you did. If we study that hard over 2 decades and don't change our mind on some stuff, that something might be off there.
Yeah, refining.
That's
You
right.
learn a little bit. Boy, I never saw that in that verse, or someone challenged me on this verse. Gary, what do you say about that? And I'm not going to just say, well, I've had my position stated and that's it. No, I went back and looked at it and say, well, I got to deal with this. I have to be
Well,
honest to myself about this.
I've got back when I was preaching every Sunday, I've got all my old Luke sermons, and I can't tell you how many times I've listened to one of those, and those are 3 years ago. And been like, man, I wish I could have that one back. So I've learned that much in 3 years. I can imagine you being at this for 40.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you've seen some things for sure.
yeah, to be sure. Yes. One of these days,
Well,
we need to sit down. I need to outline kind of the whole history of this, taking you all the way back where all of this kind of started, this generationally, to help you and others understand the progress of this and the
mhm,
elements that brought people to all of this and so forth. And there's a different spirit today than there was back then regarding that.
mhm. Well, you might think this is dumb. I don't know, but I told Zach, I said I kind of feel like just the lay of the land, the way that it sits now. There have been men who have. It's kind of like a 401k. You just throw a little bit in it at a time for a long period of time, and the compound interest doesn't really do anything until the day that it does, and then it just blows up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
typically it's when it's closer to when you're actually getting ready to retire. I said I feel like this is kind of the same way because men like you and so many others have come along, and you've been the guys taking the blows. You've been the guys that have towed the line and done the grunt work, and now you've built this thing to where essentially we're at the point now where I think the compound interest is kicking in, and it just seems like there's growth happening. And I know you alluded to that earlier on.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
there is. And
but
look, yeah, it is what it is. And I enjoy the challenge. I mean,
Mhm.
challenge me. And that's part of my sports background.
Yeah, you said when you get hit, you want to hit back.
I don't want to be, you're going to push me. I'm going to push back. I'm not going to
Right.
hit you, but I'm going to push back, and
Yeah.
I am going to force you. Well, not force. I'm going to challenge you.
Mhm.
Give me the goods. Give me the receipts. And show, the thing I've used. Show your work. I want to see your work. Don't just spout off. Well, this is what the church has believed all these years. I want to see the work on every one of those verses.
Mhm.
Show it to me. I mean, look, it should be easy, and apparently it's not for them to. I've said, give me the verse that all of you guys who signed that 3 questions letter. I want you show me your agreement on all of these verses, and I have a 260-page kind of response to that whole thing that one of these days I may end up publishing,
Mhm.
showing how
Well,
inconsistent these critics have been. They can't agree among
they
themselves.
can't agree. No, that's what I was gonna say. They
So,
can't agree on
yeah,
anything.
yeah,
That's I heard somebody maybe yesterday or the day before we were talking, and they said, "Well, they just can't get there because of Acts 111." I'm like, "Well, Milton Terry took Acts 111 is already fulfilled. What's the issue? Like
yeah, yeah.
he exegeted that." So I don't. Anyway, well, Gary, our 15 to 20 minutes turned into an hour and 9. So I blame you. I'm just kidding.
Hey,
But
we'll play this on. We'll use it on American Vision and see what happens with it.
well,
So
that's great. And you mentioned doing the whole history thing. I would love to sit down and listen to you lay that out sometime if you want to do that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. In fact,
but
probably if David invites me back next year, I may that may be one of the talks is that let me bring this all up to date and probably things that most people have never heard before.
yeah, that would be you would have a lot of interest on something like that.
Yeah.
But
So
overall, Gary, I love the conference. I loved it last year. I loved it this year. I hope we get to go again. Even if I don't speak, I would still like to go because it's such a good time.
yeah, even if
But
we're stuck with 100 people, I would still go. But I hope David and Kathy and the church see what they can come up with because I'd love to see 400 people there.
Yep. Yep. And I think it'll just continue to do this too.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
but Gary, I know you're busy, and I thank you for doing this with me. I thank you for your time. And
Anytime.
remind us again where we can go. Is it AmericanVision.org?
AmericanVision.org. All the eschatological stuff is there, but we do a lot more than that. We've got books on apologetics, history, and you'll find a ton of stuff. Free articles, free videos. I do 2 articles a week. I do 3 podcasts a week. And so just go to AmericanVision.org and you'll find all kinds of stuff.
Okay. Sorry, Gary. I got a 3-year-old girl yelling at me. Well, I guess that means it's time to go. But again,
Yes.
I appreciate it. And to everybody watching, thank you.
Thank you.